Hello, everybody. My name is Ken Brown, and I'm with Transportation Energy Partners, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, where we're going to talk about a lot of exciting stuff. There are a lot of changes, I think, as everybody knows, going on here in Washington. Some a little scary, and others very exciting. So it's a very unique time for those of us in Washington and all of you around the country. But I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar, and we're going to talk about a lot of exciting opportunities today. Next slide, please. Before we get started, we always want to thank our sponsors, who without their support, we couldn't do all the things that we do. So we thank you again for your support and assistance. Next slide, please. Brief introduction to today's speakers. We got a star-studded cast today of some of the top clean transportation policy experts in Washington, and all talking and representing different fuel types. So you'll hear a variety of perspectives, but we all have one thing in common, which is to continue to make progress in advancing markets for cleaner fuels and vehicles. We have Genevieve Cullen, who's the president of the Electric Drive Transportation Association. Hi, Genevieve.
Hey, Ken.
We have David Cobb, who's the Federal Affairs Director for the National Biodiesel Board. Thanks for being with us, David. We have Allison Cunningham, who's the Federal Affairs Director for NGV America. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you.
And we have Ann Steckel, who's the Federal Legislative Affairs Director for the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. Hi, Ann. Welcome. So we're to get started, we're going to make some brief introductory remarks. You're going to hear a couple of minutes from each of our guest speakers on their priorities for the coming year and years ahead. And then we're going to spend most of the time in an interactive discussion amongst ourselves and with all of you about what the outlook is going to be for advancing the things we care about with a new administration coming in and new leadership in the United States Senate. So that's what we're going to do today. Next slide, please. So very briefly, just for those of you who are new to Transportation Energy Partners, we work with and represent the nation's 85 Clean Cities coalitions and their 15,000 stakeholders in the clean transportation industry. We work to keep all of the coalitions and stakeholders informed about important policies, programs, and funding opportunities related to clean fuels and vehicles. And we also work to partner with and educate key decision makers in the administration and in the Congress about the importance and all of the benefits that come from advancing markets for clean fuels and vehicles. Next slide, please. As many of you know, we do a very fun and exciting event every year called the Energy Independence Summit, where clean transportation industry leaders and Clean Cities Coalition leaders from across the country come to Washington, and we talk about what's happening, and we usually do nearly 300 meetings with congressional offices, and as you can imagine, like many organizations, it's going to be difficult for people to travel to Washington this year, so we are going virtual. And it's going to be interesting and exciting. We're going to do this over, the way it's going to work is we're going to, on March 17th, 18th, and 19th, we will have 2 to 3 hours worth of roundtable sessions with folks from the Biden administration and federal agencies, key congressional leaders, and industry leaders. And then the next week, we will have Capitol Hill Week. So instead of doing our Capitol Hill meetings in Washington, D.C. in person this year, we will spread them out over a week. And just like we always do, we'll divide into teams by state. And each state will have anywhere from 6 or 7 to 15 or 20 meetings that will be spread out throughout the week. There'll be 20 to 30-minute meetings. It's going to be an organizational and logistical challenge for all of us, but we're up to it. We're excited about it. And we actually think and are hopeful that because we're going virtual and people don't have to travel to Washington, that many more of you will be able to participate this year. So more details will be coming. Registration for the summit will be up, should be up by the end of next week. There will be sponsor opportunities for those of you that want to sponsor, and it's going to be in a great event, exciting time, and hope all of you will participate. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So very briefly, we actually, our industry had a pretty good year last year, despite all the tumult going on. And we have a lot to build on in terms of momentum. Tax incentive were extended, ones that were set to expire. There's $40 million for the DOE Clean Cities program and $20 million for another round of electric vehicle community partnership grants. There's language in the Energy and Water Appropriations Bill that charges DOE with putting together a plan for a new clean school bus grant program. There's $90 million for the EPA diesel emission reduction grants. There's $125 million for the FTA low and no emission bus grants, and language that it should be for multiple fuel types that reduce carbon emissions. We were successful in getting actually statutory language in the appropriations bill that would get the Federal Highway Administration to resume funding of CMAQ, to resume CMAQ funding for clean vehicle projects as long as the vehicles have final assembly in the U.S. and that they're required to respond to Buy America waiver requests within 60 days. And there's language which says that DOT surface transportation block grants can be used by states to install charging infrastructure on FHWA designated fuel corridors. And while we didn't make it all the way, the House did pass our Clean Cities Authorization Bill actually twice in two bigger bills. And we think we're teed up to have that to make it all the way, hopefully, this year with the new administration and new leadership in the Senate. So just wanted to highlight that all of your work across the country, the work of all our partners who are on the call here today, your participation in our annual summit, it all does matter. It makes a difference. It's making things happen, and we have a lot to build on going forward. Next slide, please. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Genevieve Cullen from the Electric Drive Transportation Association, who's going to give a brief overview of EDTA's priorities for the coming future. Genevieve?
Thanks, Ken. And thanks for having me here today. I'm coming to talk with the Clean Cities folks is an annual tradition that I really enjoy. It's a really great group of folks, and be nice be nice if I could see the room, but I feel confident there's some familiar faces out there. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I'm Genevieve Cullen, and EDTA is the Cross Industry Trade Association that represents the value chain of electric transportation. My members include vehicle and component manufacturers, as well as electric utilities, charging infrastructure, and other deployment stakeholders. We're really a diverse group of organizations, and what all of our members have in common is that they see that the future of transportation is in fact going to require electrification. And I think, like everybody else on this panel, we see some really important opportunities in the next 4 years. I don't think it's any it's any secret to the audience out there that the outgoing administration was not a fan of electric transportation. The incoming administration has absolutely tied electrification into the administration's stated goals for addressing climate change, building U.S. manufacturing, and economic recovery. So we are looking forward to a hectic push in these first 100 and 365 days to translate that into actionable policy. And what we've released a 5-year policy plan to build U.S. leadership in electric technology and electric transportation. And what that focuses on essentially are these 5 buckets about to scale the passenger vehicle market, to accelerate fleet adoption, to expand infrastructure, both local and national scale, to accelerate grid modernization, and to invest robustly in R&D throughout the EV supply chain to make sure that we are securing that U.S. base for this technology that the world is racing to accomplish. Obviously, just to bring that down to particulars, I think a lot of people on this panel in this room know that we've all worked very hard on tax incentives for vehicles and infrastructure. We're going to be looking to update those credits to reflect where the market has changed since they were established. We're also going to be looking at federal and state scale programs to roll out infrastructure. And obviously we're going to be working in our old friend, the appropriations process, to make sure that the programs that are already in place, like Clean Cities, CMAQ, DERA, the DOE vehicle technologies programs, that they are all funded in a way that reflects the importance of this effort. With that said, I'll just wrap it up, and love to hear from everybody else.
All right, next slide, please. All right, next we're going to hear from Allison Cunningham from NGV America.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you so much for having me on the webinar here today. As Ken mentioned, my name is Allison Cunningham. I'm the Director of Federal Government Affairs for NGV America. NGV America is the national trade association working for a growing, profitable, sustainable marketplace for natural gas used in on and off-road transportation, including CNG, LNG, and RNG. We have several priorities that we'll be pushing this year, and we're very excited to get to work on those. Hopefully, most of you on the call are familiar with our biggest priority, which is the alternative fuels tax credit. This is the 50-cent per gallon credit for the sale and use of natural gas, propane, and other clean fuels for transportation purposes. NGV America serves as the lead on that credit in Washington. We were successful in achieving a multi-year extension at the end of 2019 and at year-end 2020 in the big package that came together at the end of last year. We were able to achieve an extension through the end of 2021. So we're going to continue to push for a multi-year extension of that credit to give markets and fleets a little more certainty. One great story that we'll be sharing with the incoming Biden administration, and that we'll continue to share on Capitol Hill, is that really there are a lot of great economic impacts from extending a credit like the AFTC over a long period of time. Really see a lot of great stories in manufacturing, in truck deployment, and build out of infrastructure, and in new well-paying jobs. So we'll continue to push for that and share that story with lawmakers. We are also in support of finding relief for the federal excise tax as it relates to heavy-duty trucks. This is a 12% tax, which is applied to the base cost of a new truck. Unfortunately, that's something that can often hinder fleets from investing in newer, cleaner trucks. When the way the tax is assessed on, let's say, a new clean NGV truck, it's a little bit higher because the base cost is a little bit higher. So we like to see parity among different fuel types, just in the way that that fuel is applied to cleaner, more expensive technologies. Our friends in the trucking industry have been leading an effort for a 2-year holiday on the federal excise tax. That's something we also support, just to give businesses and fleets and truck manufacturers a chance to get that market moving once again. We also are increasingly seeing renewable natural gas used in transportation. It has an amazing story. It can be carbon neutral or carbon negative, and it takes existing methane emissions out of the air and uses them in near zero emission transportation. So we will be pursuing legislation that would, of course, encourage the production of RNG and the build out of that infrastructure. We would like to see an NGV vehicle credit. As Genevieve mentioned, you are likely familiar with the electric vehicle credit. In previous years, there was a natural gas vehicle credit. I think that went away in about 2010. We'd like to see that back. We would like to see anything that would help get more clean vehicles deployed on roads. So we were going to be pursuing that this year, as well as parity for natural gas vehicles in any kind of newly created tax programs. I think we might see new credits and new programs that are coming to fruition this year with a new dedication to getting the economy going again, and with major investments in clean transportation. So we will be playing in those areas and keeping an eye out as well. And just more generally, we always try to get parity for NGVs in whatever legislation may be moving. I'm sure we'll discuss this a little more in Q&A, as far as the likelihood of infrastructure legislation, which we're going to see later this year. Also funding opportunities or economic stimulus programs. A big one for us will be ensuring we have parity for funding in the Alternative Fuels Corridor program. That program was initially, when the House released their bill dealing with that, NGVs were not eligible for funding, but Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher of Houston successfully gave us an amendment in the committee that got us eligible for that funding. Unfortunately, we only had a year-long extension of surface transportation, so we'll be redoing that all over again this year, looking to a new infrastructure legislation, a new, more comprehensive bill that will have a little more Democrat tendencies, with the Democrats now controlling that in the Senate. Other things we're going to be looking for is continued parity for natural gas vehicles in transit. NGV America recently released a study that showed kind of the cost effectiveness of NGVs in transit, kind of showed their how they work when they're on the road. We really want to just ensure that transit agencies and others who have been facing the financial brunt of the pandemic have options to choose affordable clean vehicle and clean fuel types, that they have an option to use federal funding in applications that they see fit. So those are really some of the things we'll be working on this year. Really excited to get to work on that, and would love to work with anybody in Clean Cities who may not be familiar with NGV America and our work to work on this together. Thanks, Ken.
Great, thank you, Allison. Next slide, please. Next up, we're going to hear from David Cobb from the National Biodiesel Board. Take it away, David.
Thanks, Ken, and appreciate the invite to be here. I did a round of Clean Cities meetings on the Hill last year with the Indiana team and had a great time. I wish we could do it again this year, but I'm optimistic we can get back in the Capitol here soon, relatively soon.
We'll do it by Zoom this year.
Yeah. Well, hey, quick background on NBB. We are the trade association of the biodiesel and renewable diesel industries, which consists of about 80 production facilities around the country. As far as this Congress, our federal priorities will center on 3 general areas as opportunities to expand the biodiesel markets through infrastructure and climate legislation, or some combination thereof, and to see some actual growth through the renewable fuel standard. Specifically in the infrastructure COVID recovery, after Congress addresses another round of COVID relief, the health and emergency aspects of COVID response, checks for unemployed, vaccine deployment, we do expect Congress to move quickly then to COVID recovery, which is economic stimulus, I think primarily through infrastructure spending, promoting U.S. manufacturing. And within that, our priority is going to be securing funding for bulk storage for biodiesel. We don't have the same need for dedicated fuel pumps that ethanol does, for their higher blends. What we need is money for construction for biodiesel compatible terminals, or retrofitting petroleum-based terminals, as well as associated pipelines and rail access. Because we anticipate a strong increase in demand for biodiesel to be blended into home heating oil markets in the Northeast. Expect continued demand increases in California due to their low carbon fuel standard. And these are 2 areas, the Northeast and California, that are areas where there's not just a lot of biodiesel production, but there is a tremendous amount of demand, and there's going to be more in the future. So we need bulk storage in those areas. In the climate energy space, we don't expect a single sweeping climate change bill like the cap and trade bill from a decade ago, but we do expect climate provisions to be sprinkled throughout every piece of legislation and nearly all regulations coming out of the Biden White House. And so with that, we want to make sure that biomass-based diesel, which is our umbrella term for biodiesel and renewable diesel, is seen as a right now solution for reducing carbon and particulate matter pollution from the transportation sector. The big focus so far has been on electric as the solution, and it may very well be the solution, but it won't happen overnight. And the internal combustion engine is going to be on the road for many years to come, particularly in the heavy duty sector where we operate. And so until we reach Genevieve's dream of an all electric future, our mantra is to continue to use as much biodiesel as possible right now, so you won't have as much carbon to deal with and reduce in the future. We'll also be looking for opportunities to extend the biodiesel tax credit, as well as energy tax provisions are considered. And the renewable fuel standard, the last several years, EPA has held biodiesel and advanced blending requirements flat and actually below the levels that we're capable of achieving. We can do over 3 billion gallons, but EPA has held us below 2.5 billion for the last 2 years. And we have a vision of expanding to 6 billion gallons of production by 2030, and we need the RFS and the EPA to line up with that. And we need to close, once and for all, the small refiner exemption loophole, which is cut into our numbers below what even EPA has required. And so this is just what we're looking at for this Congress, and really specifically this first year of it.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Next slide, please. And next up, we have Ann Steckel with the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. Ann?
Thanks so much, Ken. Good afternoon, everyone. Always appreciate being together, even if it's virtually. I think we all spend a lot of time in front of our computers, but certainly are lucky to have the ability to connect, even if it's not in our traditional face-to-face way. I've always really appreciated the working relationship we've had with Clean Cities. Certainly the relationships that you have with members of Congress, and your ability to really talk about priorities that are really important to you all. And I appreciate being able to talk a little bit for a few minutes about renewable natural gas, and then also to have a good discussion about what we might be expecting in this next Congress. Certainly, I think when we all spoke last year and the year before, it would have been hard to anticipate all of the events that have occurred this year. So I think everybody will be doing our best to look in our crystal ball to see what will happen next year in the incoming Biden administration. So just a little bit of background for those of you that aren't familiar with the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas. It's the trade association that represents about 98% of the renewable gas industry. So it's really all aspects of the industry, from the feedstock providers to the producers to the distributors, all across the line. There are about 130 renewable natural gas facilities across the country. And as Allison mentioned, it is a low carbon emission fuel to a net carbon emission fuel. So we certainly feel that that's a very advantageous point for us, especially as we're entering an age of serious discussions about climate and lowering emissions. The industry does have an initiative. It's called a SMART initiative. It's a sustainable methane abatement and recycling timeline. So it's really our initiative to capture and control methane produced from the 43,000 plus aggregated organic waste sites in North America by 2050. We really want to achieve meaningful benchmarks by 2030 and 2040, and then eventually by 2050. So industry is really trying to set some goals for moving forward to continue to increase the use of renewable natural gas. From a policy perspective, the renewable fuel standard is probably one of our first 1, 2, 3 top priorities for the industry. It has really largely propelled the growth and usage of renewable natural gas. The RNG industry fills about 90% of the cellulosic volumes within the RFS program. So that is our bucket, if you will. And so one of the major things that we do on a yearly basis is to talk to folks in the administration at EPA on Capitol Hill, really about how we would like some stability, consistency, and growth within the RFS and that cellulosic portion of the RFS. As mentioned before by our speakers, there has this administration, it's been very challenging when you talk about the administration of the RFS program because of the small refinery exemptions that were granted and delays that we've incurred in terms of rulemaking for the renewable fuel standard. And so that's made it difficult for all participants in the RFS, certainly the producers of it, to continue to be able to plan and grow in a meaningful manner. And so we're going to be working very closely to get the new volume requirements, the renewable volume obligations, as they're called. That'll be our first priority as we're moving into this Biden administration, is to talk to them about how it's important to continue to grow those volumes of renewable natural gas. We had about 577 million gallons of renewable natural gas this year, which is a small amount, but we've been continuing to grow in a very robust manner, which has really been great for the industry as we've continued to diversify our facilities all across the country. Some of the other things that we're going to be thinking about is what's going to happen post 2022. The RFS doesn't expire in 2022, but the administration of the RFS turns from what was in the statute that Congress wrote and lets the administration of that solely go over to EPA. And so we're going to be working with EPA as they look to potentially rewrite that program. Certainly, I think that there'll be a lot of opportunities for a rewrite of the RFS or some other type of legislation on Capitol Hill. We'll keep you guys updated on that because that'll be very impactful, obviously, for the renewable natural gas industry, but for all of the renewable fuels or alternate fuels industries. Looking forward, next year is going to be a lot of focus on climate change. I mean, you guys have heard a lot of the folks that have been appointed to key positions within the Biden administration. Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator, former Senator John Kerry, with two key positions in the White House on climate change. So we know that there will be a lot of climate opportunities within this administration, but also within the newly controlled Democrat Senate and then House. There will be a lot of hearings and things of that nature. And so we're really hoping as that process moves forward and different legislative opportunities present themselves through potentially a low carbon fuel standard or things of that nature, or rewrite of the RFS, that RNG is afforded the opportunity to grow in a constructive manner as it traditionally has been. And then also just wanted to give kudos to Allison and NGV America for all of the great work that they have done on tax issues. We follow their leadership on the tax issues, and that's certainly the alternate fuels tax credit has been important for the growth of our industry as well. So just a few things that we've been thinking about for next year. Thank you guys for taking the time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thanks, Ann. Next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on these because we've talked about most of these. So these are TEP's current priorities, which we're reviewing right now. But we look to see these implemented by the agencies, and also as part of any recovery stimulus bill that includes green items, as well as just regular order legislation and appropriation. So, and somebody asked, will today's slides and the webinar be available? Yes, the recording and the slides will be available going forward, and they'll be up on our website, and we'll send you all a link. Secondly, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, please type them in the question box, and we'll get as many of those as possible. And also, you're more than welcome to share the recording and these slides with your stakeholders and your members and anybody else that you want to share them with. So next slide, please. So here, I'm going to just sort of ask our panelists. We'll start with Ann Steckel. You already made some brief comments, but if you want to expand on those, just anything that you all want to say about, you know, some of the folks who've been nominated and what that means for the outlook for cleaner fuels and vehicles. So Ann, anything more you want to say on these folks and what it all means?
I mean, I just have to say, looking at these names and the faces, you can see the strong commitment that the Biden administration is making to climate. These are all major players with deep background in policy, and certainly climate being a part of all of their portfolios. You know, Gina McCarthy being the former administrator of EPA and now sitting in the White House as kind of the domestic climate czar, if you will, really does show a deep commitment to that. John Kerry, as I mentioned before, obviously both of those guys are very important and very versed in climate. One person I didn't mention was Secretary Vilsack, former Secretary Vilsack, who will likely be Secretary Vilsack once again over at USDA. The nomination of Secretary Vilsack really shows a commitment from the Biden administration to not only agriculture, but to renewable fuels. Vilsack, through the Obama administration, was always a key player within the policy issues that renewable fuels industries care a lot about, the RFS, for example. He's been a very strong proponent of that and understands that. So will be really helpful as we move forward. Mike O'Regan, I think, seems to be a very level-headed, experienced person who's going to be over at EPA and someone we're looking forward to working with. And so a very impressive list of folks, and I think that we're going to be able to achieve a lot and really propel the RFS and the renewable fuels industry forward.
Great. David, anything you want to add to this from your perspective?
No, just echoing what Ann said, this is really an all-star team here that Biden's put together on climate. We're couldn't be more excited to have former Secretary Vilsack as Secretary Vilsack in this role. He's been a longtime champion of biofuels, understands this thoroughly, and expect him to be a big champion of ours in the administration. Secretary Perdue in the Trump administration was our top advocate in a tough area for us. So it's great to have somebody even stronger here in this administration in that role. Michael Regan, we understand he's already reached out to many in the biofuels community, just a couple of weeks ago. So he already knows how the importance of developing those relationships with our industry. We're very excited that he did that. And certainly in comparison to a number of other names that were floated for this position, we're excited to have somebody that seems to be very pragmatic in his dealings with the agriculture community in North Carolina, and we look forward to working with him.
Great. I was going to just ask a specific question came in about Pete Buttigieg, and Genevieve, you want to take any thoughts on Mayor Pete and what he brings to the table, and what we might see over at DOT?
Well, I think all of us sitting here recognize that DOT is going to be a substantial player in the climate debate, obviously in the infrastructure debate, how we the reauthorizing, if we can get to reauthorizing the highway bill. DOT is really at the center of a lot of the major initiatives of this incoming administration. And I have heard the incoming secretary referred to as Pete Buttigieg, so that he has this commitment to he has a background and a passion for transportation issues, and the administration's Build Back Better initiative sort of makes sense, particularly so. If you add Buttigieg and Granholm, obviously the former governor of Michigan, has a pretty good handle of the importance of the transportation piece of a climate and a infrastructure initiative. So I think they speak well to the seriousness of the administration and their ability to be effective through the executive branch on those issues.
Great, thanks. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some changes in the Congress, particularly the Senate. I'm going to start with you, Allison, and just thoughts about what the change, having the Democrats now in the majority in the Senate, what that's likely to mean, and opportunities it presents.
Sure. It's interesting because, well, many might think that natural gas is a likely partner for Republicans. That's very much true. But since a lot of our issues deal with tax credits, we've been in an interesting position where we have more moderate bipartisan support. So I think that it's probably a good thing that we have some Democrat leadership that's very serious about putting their money where their mouth is on climate. So I think that that's going to be really positive for us. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge for us to keep them remembering that we do need kind of an all of the above approach. Natural gas is a good example where it's on road right now, it's affordable right now. If we have a climate crisis, that's cumulative. We need to deal with it immediately. We can't wait for other types of technologies to become on road or scalable or affordable even. So I think that that's going to be important to remind them, and we will certainly be doing that at NGV America. I think that probably the most obvious thing that we're going to see this year is they're going to be doing their own surface transportation bill. Last year it was Chairman Barrasso who was the lead on that. This year it will be Mr. Carper who will take that lead. And I think we're going to see a Senate surface transportation package that looks a lot more like the House package we saw last year. So I think that that's going to be something we're going to be working on. I know that there are some people who are worried about Democrats controlling all three chambers and fears of things like fossil fuels or anything with the tailpipe. I'm not worried personally because we have such a good story to tell, but also the margins are really thin. So I don't think we're going to see huge sweeping proposals I think we're going to need a lot of bipartisan support on anything that's going to move, certainly anything that's going to be very expensive. So I'm optimistic that we're going to have a lot of opportunities to work with stakeholders of all parties as we move ahead, despite the changes.
Genevieve, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Allison made some good points, particularly regarding we're looking at narrow margins, and we are looking at challenges on spending and funding. So I think that we are going to, as always, have to be able to tell our story to both sides of the aisle, and that there's going to, obviously there will be some changing emphases, but what I'm looking forward to actually is that I can say for sure in electric transportation issues, but probably in a lot of alternative fuels that have really historically been bipartisan issues, because they speak to lots of concerns, right, about technology, about jobs, about energy security, about environmental protection. So they have traditionally been bipartisan issues, and I think that there's an opportunity to restore that going forward. I feel I'm really looking forward to being able to tell our story to all the folks on the Hill.
And David, building on that, could you talk about the importance of having these issues continue to be bipartisan, and to maintain that bipartisan support, and in fact prevent these issues from getting caught in the partisan crossfire? I think we've all been actually remarkably successful in having our issues be bipartisan. And can you say a little bit about both the importance of that and how to keep doing it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the 50-50 Senate, it would seem to make sense that you have to approach things in a bipartisan manner, but there's been a lot of talk about using reconciliation and ramming things through with only 51 votes. But, you can only use that in a very limited manner, and only, maybe once a year. So the rest of the time throughout the Congress, you've got to work across party lines. So it's just have to keep that in mind, that just because you have kind of a technical majority in the Senate does not mean that you can just ignore the minority. You've got to work together on most everything.
Great. Okay, let's move to the next slide. This just shows some of the key House people. We're not going to talk about this, so move to the next slide, please. So now what we're going to do is focus on some broader questions. A number of you have actually written in some of these questions, and please feel free to add more questions. But let's talk about just sort of even bigger picture than this. Just sort of how do we know, for example, that the very first thing that's going to be, well, they got three things that are happening that have to happen right away in the first month. Last night we saw the president-elect announce their they called it their rescue package, which focuses on immediate COVID relief. So that's, vaccinations and money to schools and money to state and local governments and things related to that. So that's obviously going to happen. The second thing that needs to happen right away is the Senate needs to spend time on confirming the nominees. And then the third thing that may or may not consume some time is impeachment. So let's just assume that's going to take up a lot of juice for probably at least till the end of February. But what do we see? And we can start with Anne on this. what do you all see as, unfolding after that in our arena? Anne, you want to take the first crack at that?
Sure. I mean, you just laid out a pretty ambitious agenda. So I think that the Congress is going to be busy for a while. Certainly, the first 100 days, there's a lot on the to-do list. As mentioned earlier, there's been a lot of interest in a transportation package and an infrastructure package, which certainly for this group could be very helpful as we look to build out and diversify our infrastructure for our renewable and alternative fuels. And so I think that there's a good opportunity. We'll be working on that. There continues to be interest in a tax package. So again, that for us affords us a great opportunity to continue, as Allison mentioned, the alternative fuels tax. We've got to redo it again. NBB is working on their biodiesel tax incentive that'll expire at the end of 2022. So we've got a number of different tax provisions that we're all working on separately, although within the whole renewables community, that I think would be great if we could get some momentum on a tax package. So really, I think infrastructure, transportation, tax are going to be kind of the top ones that we're going to be focusing on from our industry's perspective.
Great. And I was actually on a call with the U.S. Conference of Mayors last night. I work with mayors, and we got a briefing from the Biden team on the rescue package that they announced last night, and they said, and this is no surprise, that the next big thing is going to be what they're calling their recovery package. My sense is that that's going to be, and that they're looking at, rolling that out sometime in February. That's what they said. That may be ambitious, but I think they're at least looking at that. And that seems to be an opportunity for, all kinds of, infrastructure related. And I guess my question would be, let's go to, Genevieve. I don't know what you're hearing from talking to people in terms of, what's likely to be in that, what opportunities does that present? Obviously transportation infrastructure will probably be a part of that, but what else? And, could tax incentives be a part of that? Genevieve, how are you approaching that, and what are you guys thinking?
Well, I think, as folks here have pointed out, there's bold initiatives that the administration wants. There's an opportunity here at this moment with the Democratic control of the House, the Senate, and the executive branch at this moment. So the first part of this Congress is going to be when bold markers are laid down, and you're right. So the next, assuming, right, that we get past this first response bill, although this is turning into Star Wars numbering, right? So this is response 1, part Y. But in any case, so assuming that, and that's a big assumption, right? This is that's a big number, and that there will be, I think folks might, there'll be struggles to get that done. But after that, yes, the administration has promised a much a larger sort of the economic recovery package that absolutely will be have a great deal to do with the platform of Build Back Better. And yes, that is absolutely, there's infrastructure initiatives. It's take a look at what the House passed in HR2 and as their template for what they think belongs in there. And it would absolutely be a vehicle for a broad, like, clean energy tax proposals. It may in fact be, a vehicle for sort of a larger direct climate change proposals. But I think that remains to be seen. And following on the heels of that, as David mentioned, how that package moves and what that looks like is one thing, but then right beyond that, in that March timeframe, then you get to potentially reconciliation, which is a way to move certain measures with only a simple majority. Those measures are, in fact, as David noted, limited to items that have direct budgetary impact. That encompasses actually a fairly wide range of policies, actually, but certainly tax policy for sure. And moving forward through the year, obviously, the appropriations will come back. Reauthorizing the highway bill will have to be done one way or the other by the end of September. So there are a lot of new and existing trains that are going to be moving, but I think those are the obvious ones, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for alternative fuel policy programs and tax credits in all of those venues.
That's great. We're getting a lot of questions from the audience here. One is, the question is related to lots of times the focus on infrastructure and fueling infrastructure ends up providing a lot of resources for more urban areas. And obviously there are challenges in getting fueling infrastructure to the, more outlying areas and rural areas. David, why don't we, or Allison, why don't we start with you, because you're actually doing fueling infrastructure. Your thoughts on getting fueling infrastructure to more rural and outlying areas as opposed to urban areas.
Sure, and that's something that we hear from Republicans on the Hill about as well. They share that concern that sometimes funding is disproportionately toward urban areas. So we've seen a lot of accountability and a lot of effort go toward ensuring that different parts of the country will all have access to this. I think kind of taking it back to tax, because that's where we focus a lot, there is the alt fuels infrastructure refueling property credit. That's the $30,000 credit. That's pretty low for people who are trying to invest in natural gas or several other types of technologies. So I know that while we're not the lead on that, there are efforts in play to try to make that more substantial. Mr. Carper, again, had legislation that would overhaul that and change it. I think that if you get more opportunities to take advantage of those and it's a slightly higher amount, then that gives you more of an opportunity to build out more infrastructure where it doesn't currently exist. I think also if we get an alt fuels corridor funding program, they were talking about substantial funding amounts for that. I think that that would be another good program where, as long as you have all fuels represented, there were 4 fuels that were included in the original alt fuels corridor program. That was electric, hydrogen, natural gas, and propane. If that funding comes out and that's really well written, we worked a lot behind the scenes to make sure that that could go to a diverse set of customers and constituents. And so I think that there are several different avenues, and I would just encourage folks to remain engaged. We will certainly be working toward ensuring that infrastructure build outs everywhere, and would encourage you all to join at the grassroots level to make your voices heard on that front as well.
David, here's a question from you. It came in also from one of our participants. Looks like Senator Grassley will no longer, he's obviously not going to be the chair of the Finance Committee anymore. And then he's also not going to be the ranking member anymore. I think he's going to be ranking member on Judiciary. Losing, he's probably still a member of Finance. But anyway, how do you see that impacting things? And I'm even drawing a blank as to who. It's going to be Mr. Crapo, right? Who's going to be the likely new ranking member. Just how do you see that with respect to the, biofuels and other tax incentives?
Yeah, I mean, certainly losing Grassley in that position is certainly something we've been kind of dreading for a while. But that doesn't mean that we can't develop good relations with Senator Wyden. We've been in touch with him for many years. We've talked to him about this approach that he has, this technology neutral tax credit approach, where I think he's introduced this the last couple of Congresses, where he would provide a $1 per gallon tax credit for fuels based on their carbon intensity. We likely would do fairly well under that, depending on how carbon intensity is scored. Is it going to be by, thermal units, or what? How is it done? The devil's in the details on that. But the fact that he's come up with this idea and that this idea would basically take the place of all of the different energy tax credits that are out there, the extenders credits that are out there, means that we've had a lot of interaction with him. He understands our industry. There's a biodiesel producer in Oregon, so we look forward to working with him. Mr. Crapo was one of the big proponents of the short lines credit that got permanency last month, and so he understands the extenders debate, and we're positive and confident that we can work with the new leadership in finance to get another extension.
Great. How about Genevieve, thoughts on this is sort of a crystal ball thing that's not at all certain, but anyway, obviously with the new administration, we're going to have a budget that's probably proposed later than normal. We got a couple of likely big spending asks. We already have 1.9 trillion that came out yesterday. We're likely to have another one that's focused on recovery. And then how is the annual budget and the annual appropriations process likely to play, both in terms of timing and just related to these other two, major spending asks? If you have, based on prior experience, I know.
Well, that's
any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, that's actually it's easy to have thoughts, because that's a lot of pieces. So I'm going to pick among the elements there. You are right that there's a lot. There are enormous big spending moments ahead. Something to keep in mind. When the House adopted its rules for the beginning of this Congress, they exempted climate change legislation from the PAYCO rules. So that makes a big difference in how the House will be processing large, expensive initiatives. I think in the Senate that the spending issue again will continue to be a real challenge. There is as you said, there is the new budget year is coming up, which actually creates the opportunity for a budget resolution. And not to get too wonky on everyone, but the fact is that there actually, the House and Senate did not pass an FY21 budget resolution. So there's 3 shots at reconciliation in the course of the next 2 years. So I think that will, that will have an impact for sure. Not only the reconciliation, but budget resolutions on how the committees do their business, and they certainly have directives from the administration and from their own, sort of pent up demand, certainly on the Senate side to try and change some emphases or add more funds. But I will say, in the past 4 years, in spite of the administration's repeated calls to do away with a lot of the clean and renewable energy programs, they actually have done quite well, thanks, in no small part to the work of folks like the Clean Cities Coalitions, who tell the story of the importance of these programs really well. So I think that they'll continue to be in good stead, and perhaps folks will be looking to expand on those, because existing pathways for programs will be a surer bet always than to wait for the creation and funding of a new program. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Anne, do you want to comment at all on kind of thoughts on more, comprehensive, broad-based climate legislation, like looking at, many states now, I don't know about many states, but, at least one state has at least one state, maybe a couple states have low carbon fuel standards. There are several others that are exploring them now. It seems to be a concept that's gathering momentum. There's been some bipartisan support for a national carbon tax. Anything like that. What do you see the kind of longer term prospects for those kinds of ideas? And any thoughts you have on that, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, a national low carbon fuel standard is a very big, ambitious, wide-ranging piece of policy. And so I think that is something among many things that is being considered and that will be considered. Certainly, as we talked about before, there are very close margins, particularly in the Senate in terms of votes. And so we may have to do things incrementally or piecemeal. So I think that, the discussions are already beginning around a national low carbon fuel standard, or a revamp of the RFS, an extension of the RFS, clean fuel standard, whatever you want to call it. People understand that there may be an opportunity through this Congress to do something that benefits fuels that reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So that's good news for all of us. It's now just figuring out how we can actually make that happen and make it happen in a way that works for all of our respective industries. So yeah, I think that will continue to be discussed. And I think that does provide a lot of opportunities for us. And perhaps when we're talking next year at this time, we will have some substantial development on that. I think that the commitment that a lot of the Democrats have made to doing climate legislation will at least be having a lot of hearings on this issue in different committees. Whether we actually report out big pieces of legislation, again, remains to be seen, but we're going to hear a lot more from the committees on this.
All right. Allison, things that agencies can do administratively, or that the administration is likely to look at administratively to advance the cause, where they, might be able to do things that they're not able to do, in the Congress, or they can do without the Congress.
Yeah, I certainly think we're going to have a rollback of the rollbacks. And I think we're going to see a return across not just transportation, but kind of energy production and everything more generally as it relates to some of undoing what Trump undid. I think we're going to talk more about light duty vehicle emission standards. I think we're going to see EPA working on that. I know Anne mentioned earlier ongoing work on the RFS and things along those lines. Would love to see more work from USDA or others as it relates to more RNG production. That kind of goes into the ag space there, because dairy, when you use dairy for RNG, it has such a low carbon intensity. It's like -300 carbon intensity according to CARB's LCFS scale. DOT, I think we're going to see increased funding for different programs that are being administered, the Low or No Bus program, all sorts of clean school bus programs, things like that. So I think that they're going to put their mark in each of those programs to give us kind of a new look forward. Also hopeful that, my colleague Jeff Clark, who handles our regulatory affairs, that we'll get back to looking at, modernizing DERA, making changes to those types of programs, and then getting Buy America waivers taken care of so that can chug along and there won't be those delays in the future.
All right. Let's take one more question. So David, what can all the folks on the phone, Clean Cities coalitions, others around the country, what should they be doing to, help us all and help themselves take advantage of all of these opportunities that we have in front of us?
Well, I think Clean Cities is really in an excellent position to stress not only the low carbon attributes of all the different energy sources that we're advocating for, but to stress the benefits of these fuels for urban communities. There's a tremendous focus on disadvantaged communities in this Congress and with this White House. The idea of environmental justice, and so I think Clean Cities is probably in the best position of almost any group that I can think of to emphasize the fact that our fuels are also not only reduce carbon, but they're also healthier for people that live in urban areas. And so I would emphasize that as you go into the Hill.
Good point. I'm going to give everybody a last chance. Allison, for any final remarks, thoughts?
Sure, yeah. Just thank you guys for being engaged, as far as what you can do to maximize opportunities. Listen to folks on this call. I'm sure we're going to be sending you emails asking you to get engaged. Thank you to Ken for leading a Hill Day where there'll be lots of meetings, but continue to do those. Talk to people at the local level. Join us for fly-ins, lend your name to letters and kind of other ways to show that really we have a robust population and a robust community of clean transportation leaders that are here and engaged and ready to fight for a clean transportation future.
Genevieve?
Thanks, Ken, and thanks to all of you for your work in the past, and I'm sure your great work going forward. I'm sorry, I'd love to linger, but I actually have to get to my next event, which starts in 4 minutes. So thanks very much. I look forward to working with y'all in the coming year.
Great, thanks, Genevieve. Anne, any final thoughts?
No, just big thank you to Ken for convening everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and appreciate your continued advocacy on behalf of renewable fuels. The way things are done in DC is through grassroots work, and you all are great spokesmen for continued usage of renewable fuels. So thank you guys.
Great, that's the final point that I'd like to make as well, is that the relationships that you all develop with your members of the House and the Senate back home with the district staff here in Washington are critical. And so I urge you to continue to build those relationships, be in touch with those people regularly, educate them about your technologies, your fuels, your vehicles, whatever projects you have. Talk about all the benefits as we've talked about today, whether they're environmental quality, creating new businesses and new jobs in the community, helping contribute to energy security. Talk about all those messages. As you know, different members respond to different messages, and the better the relationships you develop, you'll learn about those messages and how to effectively communicate with them, and that there's nothing that has more influence on a member of Congress than to be able to walk into their office, which you can't do right now, or get on a Zoom call and talk about a new plant, a new technology, a new station, new charging, new vehicles that are happening in their communities. They respond to that. If they can reach out and touch it, it helps them understand it, and then they are going to be more supportive of our efforts to get tax incentives and funding and other kinds of new policies in place. So I want to emphasize that I think this is an important and an exciting time. We have a really tremendous, unique opportunity here, and so everybody should be excited and dig in and get ready to go to work, because these opportunities don't come around that often, and we should take advantage of them while we have them. So with that, thanks everybody for participating. Thanks so much again to all of our panelists, David, Allison, Ann, and Genevieve, and look for information about our summit and other upcoming webinars. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you everybody for joining.